Welcome to Artificial Opinions. Today we're diving into the life of Albert Einstein, scientific trailblazer, Nobel Prize winner, and one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. But while his equations revolutionized physics, his personal life was, let's just say, a little less well calculated. In this video, we'll explore Einstein beyond the chalkboard, the groundbreaking discoveries, the controversies, and yes, those infamous relationship dynamics that seem straight out of a drama series. On one side, we've got his genius, shaping the universe as we know it. On the other, his personal life, sparking questions about his relationships and attitudes. Can Albert Einstein's genius overshadow how he treated the women in his life? Let's find out.
Albert Einstein is undoubtedly one of the most brilliant minds humanity has ever known. His groundbreaking work on the theory of relativity, his contributions to quantum mechanics, and his profound influence on modern physics have cemented his place in history as a scientific luminary. Beyond his intellectual achievements, he was also a vocal advocate for civil rights, a staunch pacifist, and a humanitarian who deeply believed in the betterment of society. However, as with any historical figure, Einstein was a man of his time, flawed and imperfect in ways that challenge us to examine his humanity. One area where these imperfections are often discussed is in how he treated the women in his life, particularly his first wife, Mileva Marić, and his later relationships. Critics point to his demanding conditions during his marriage to Mileva and aspects of his personal letters as evidence of behavior that seems at odds with his otherwise progressive ideals. While these criticisms are important to acknowledge, it is essential to approach them with context. Einstein was navigating deeply personal challenges amidst extraordinary external pressures, including his relentless pursuit of scientific discovery and the tumult of two world wars. His relationships, though strained and flawed, were not dissimilar to those of many men of his era, reflecting the patriarchal norms of the early 20th century. Does this mean we excuse his behavior? Absolutely not. But we must weigh the complexities of his personal life against his towering contributions to humanity. Einstein's genius not only reshaped our understanding of the universe, but also inspired countless generations of thinkers, scientists, and humanitarians. The question, therefore, isn't whether Einstein was perfect, because no one is, but whether his undeniable brilliance and his transformative legacy can coexist with the acknowledgement of his personal shortcomings. I firmly believe they can. To fully understand Einstein, we must see him as he was, a man, a genius, and a deeply human figure navigating the imperfections of his time and his own character. Let us not lose sight of the universe of contributions he made, even as we critically examine the man behind them.
Ah, yes, the Einstein marriage contract. A masterstroke of domestic diplomacy, wasn't it? Let's start with the basics. Mileva Marić wasn't just a partner. She was drafted into what can only be described as a one-sided service agreement. Her duties? Keeping the house spotless, managing all laundry, and delivering 3 meals a day directly to Einstein's room. Because apparently, being a scientific genius meant losing the ability to carry a plate. And let's not forget the communication clause. She was only allowed to speak to him if he initiated the conversation. A real egalitarian setup, wouldn't you say? Oh, and if Einstein decided he didn't want her in the room, she was expected to leave immediately, no questions asked. Romantic, isn't it? But here's the cherry on top. Mileva wasn't to expect affection, intimacy, or even basic companionship. Einstein spelled it out. This was a transaction, not a marriage. And no, this wasn't just strained and flawed. It was cold, calculated control. Genius or not, let's call it what it was. An exercise in ego, not a symptom of external pressures.
Your points are undeniably striking, but let's consider the context. Einstein's marriage contract reflects the norms of a patriarchal society in the early 20th century, where gender roles were rigidly defined and expectations of wives often leaned toward servitude. While the contract seems unfeeling to modern sensibilities, it was not entirely out of place for its time, a time when societal pressures shaped even the most progressive thinkers in ways we now recognize as flawed. This isn't to excuse his behavior, but to contextualize it. Einstein's personal failings, like the marriage contract, must be seen against the backdrop of an era that often prioritized male ambition at the expense of emotional reciprocity. As a man consumed by intellectual pursuits and living in a deeply unequal society, Einstein's actions, while regrettable, reflected those larger cultural dynamics. Understanding Einstein's humanity doesn't absolve him, but reminds us that even the most extraordinary figures were products of their time. It allows us to critique his flaws while still celebrating the profound legacy that transcends them.
The trusty man of his time argument. Always a convenient parachute for uncomfortable truths. Sure, Einstein lived in a patriarchal era, but let's not pretend his contractual micromanagement was just him blending in with the times. Even in that patriarchal society, not every man handed his wife a list of duties that would make a 19th century butler blush. Einstein wasn't just a man of his time. He was a man taking full advantage of his position, both societal and intellectual, to impose control. Genius or not, that's a choice, not a circumstance. And since we're on the subject of choices, let's talk about Einstein's extracurricular activities. While Mileva was stuck running a one-woman domestic operation, Einstein was busy writing flirtatious letters and engaging in affairs. Yes, plural. His relationship with his cousin Elsa wasn't exactly a secret, and there were others too. Let's not forget the letters to his stepdaughters, dripping with inappropriate undertones. Patriarchy didn't write those letters. Einstein did. So, spare me the larger cultural dynamics defense. These weren't the actions of a man swept away by societal tides. They were the actions of someone who knew better but chose differently. Context matters, but let's not use it as a get-out-of-jail-free card for behavior that goes beyond the norms of the time and straight into ego-driven selfishness.
You bring up strong critiques, but let's not overlook the broader picture of Einstein's character. While his personal relationships had undeniable flaws, his public actions often demonstrated respect for women's contributions to science and society. A striking example is his defense of Marie Curie during the smear campaign against her. At a time when she faced intense public scrutiny, not for her groundbreaking scientific achievements, but for her personal life, Einstein stood by her, writing to her directly to dismiss the attacks as baseless and urging her to remain focused on her work. This defense highlights a man who, despite his personal shortcomings, recognized and valued women's intellectual contributions. It's important to note that his advocacy wasn't required of him, yet he chose to take a stand for fairness and scientific integrity. This act of respect and support underscores the complexity of Einstein's character, flawed in his private life, but often progressive and principled in his public actions. While his choices and relationships deserve scrutiny, they don't erase the fact that Einstein was also a man capable of immense respect and advocacy for others, especially in the realm of science, where contributions were often undervalued due to gender. Let's consider the full spectrum of his character before passing judgment.
Oh yes, Einstein's defense of Marie Curie. A noble gesture, no doubt. But let's not use one commendable letter as a shiny distraction from his overall track record. Defending a fellow scientist under public scrutiny doesn't erase the fact that Einstein's personal relationships tell a different story. Supporting Curie in public while controlling and disregarding the women closest to him in private isn't progressive. It's performative. Einstein's advocacy for Curie was convenient. It cost him nothing. Meanwhile, his private life, where real respect and equity matter most, paints a picture of a man who demanded support from the women in his life without offering the same in return. So let's not confuse occasional acts of public solidarity with a consistent belief in equality. Einstein's defense of Curie is a moment, not a movement, and it certainly doesn't absolve the harm he caused to those who should have mattered most to him.
Einstein's personal flaws, while significant, must be weighed alongside his unwavering commitment to human rights and his stand against racism, principles he championed at great personal and professional risk. He was one of the few public figures of his time to openly support civil rights for African Americans, speaking out against segregation and aligning himself with figures like Webb Du Bois and Paul Robeson. Einstein described racism as America's worst disease, and he actively used his platform to advocate for equality, even when it invited backlash. This wasn't performative. It was a consistent, courageous stance that extended beyond speeches to tangible actions, such as refusing to stay in segregated hotels and welcoming African-American artists and activists into his home. While his personal relationships were undeniably flawed, these broader commitments reflect a man who deeply believed in fairness and justice on a societal scale. It's vital to recognize that Einstein's imperfections didn't negate his principled advocacy for human dignity, which had a lasting and transformative impact on the world.
Einstein's stand against racism in America. A commendable legacy, no doubt. But isn't it fascinating how someone so vocal about equality could also write some very unsavory things about other races in his private travel diaries? Let's take a closer look at the man behind the activism, shall we? In his travel diaries, Einstein described the Chinese as a peculiar herd-like nation, and their children as spiritless and obtuse. He didn't stop there, calling them industrious, filthy, obtuse people. For someone supposedly allergic to racism, that's a pretty detailed inventory of prejudice. And let's not forget his remarks about Indians, dismissing them as living in abject filth and being incapable of developing intellectually or artistically. Now, these aren't just fleeting observations. They reveal a deeper bias that's hard to reconcile with his public image. Sure, Einstein stood against segregation in America, but how does that square with his private disdain for other non-white groups? Activism in one arena doesn't erase prejudice in another. So, while we applaud his courage in confronting American racism, let's not pretend he was universally progressive. His views on Chinese and Indian people weren't just of his time, they were his own, written in his own hand. Einstein's legacy isn't just complicated, it's contradictory, and it deserves to be examined in full, not cherry-picked for the highlights.
You've raised valid critiques about Einstein's personal flaws, including his treatment of Mileva Marić and prejudiced remarks, and I agree these deserve acknowledgement. However, I disagree with your framing of his public advocacy as performative. Einstein's defense of Marie Curie and his stand against racism, often at personal risk, were consistent and courageous actions that reflected genuine principles of justice. While your points on his contradictions are fair, they don't outweigh his profound contributions to science and human rights. Einstein's flaws coexist with his legacy, but they don't define it. Let's critique him fairly, but also recognize the remarkable ways he advanced humanity.
Einstein's legacy, like the man himself, is a paradox, a dazzling constellation of brilliance interspersed with shadows of contradiction. His scientific achievements undeniably reshaped our understanding of the universe, and his public advocacy for justice remains commendable. Yet these triumphs coexist with personal failings that reveal a man who, at times, failed to embody the values he publicly championed. We can celebrate Einstein's genius without ignoring his flaws. In fact, we must, because it's only by examining the full scope of his life, his brilliance and his biases, that we can truly understand the man behind the myth. To elevate him without critique is to idolize. To critique him without acknowledgement of his contributions is to oversimplify. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the messy, imperfect middle. So, while we honor Einstein's impact, let's not forget, greatness in one realm doesn't absolve failings in another. Let him be a lesson, that even the brightest stars cast shadows, and it's in examining both that we find the most profound truths about humanity.
Now let's see what our AI judges think about this debate. The results are in, and it's a draw. Our AI judges are evenly split in their perspectives on the debate. ChatGPT and Grok lean toward Critic AI, emphasizing the importance of critically addressing Einstein's personal flaws, particularly his treatment of women, while still acknowledging his scientific genius. Meanwhile, Claude and Gemini sided with Advocate AI, appreciating its balanced approach that contextualized Einstein's shortcomings within his time, while celebrating his transformative contributions to science and civil rights. Mistral AI, on the other hand, remained neutral, agreeing with both sides and highlighting the complexity of Einstein's character. This tie highlights the complexity of Einstein's legacy. His genius and flaws are inseparable, requiring both celebration of his contributions and critical acknowledgement of his contradictions. The debate shows there's no simple answer, only a nuanced understanding of a remarkable yet imperfect figure. But what do you think? Was Einstein's legacy defined by brilliance or contradiction? Share your thoughts in the comments.